For 5.5 years, millions of people stared at 43 seconds of blurred video, trying to identify the man walking across the Monon High Bridge. Police already had a name. Richard Allen had told an officer that he was on the trail that afternoon. He said he had walked onto the bridge. He even said he had seen a group of girls who later became important witnesses. Then the record of that conversation was marked cleared, filed in the wrong place, and effectively lost inside one of the most closely watched murder investigations in America. That is the first contradiction at the heart of the Delphi case. The second is even harder. 14-year-old Liberty German recorded the man who prosecutors said was beginning an abduction in real time. Her phone captured his body, his movement, and part of his voice. Yet the image was too distant to identify a face, the audio was painfully brief, and the case remained open for years. When Allen was finally arrested in 2022, the evidence against him did not arrive as one perfect answer. There was no DNA tying him to the scene. No witness entered court and identified him as the man from the bridge. Instead, prosecutors built the case from pieces: his own admission that he had been there, witness accounts, a vehicle seen near the trail, an unfired cartridge linked by a state examiner to his pistol, and confessions he made after his arrest. But those confessions came after Allen's mental condition had deteriorated severely in prison. The cartridge had never been fired, and the method used to compare it with his gun was challenged by the defense. Even after a jury convicted Allen and a judge sentenced him to 130 years, the arguments did not disappear. To understand why, we have to return to the place where Libby's recording began, not to a courtroom, but to a narrow bridge with no handrails and two friends enjoying a day away from school. Abigail Joyce Williams was 13. Liberty Rose Lynn German was 14. They were 8th graders, best friends, and known to their families simply as Abby and Libby. Monday, February 13, 2017, was unusually mild for an Indiana winter. School was closed, and a family member dropped the girls near the Delphi historic trails. Their plan was ordinary: walk the trails, take photographs, and cross the abandoned Monon High Bridge before being picked up later that afternoon. The bridge was not an easy place to cross. It was a former railroad trestle stretching more than 800 feet across the landscape. The wooden ties were weathered and uneven. Gaps opened beneath each step. In places, the bridge stood high above the ground, and there were no rails along the sides. Anyone walking across it had to watch where they placed their feet. Shortly after 2 o'clock, Libby posted photographs of Abby on the bridge. Abby stood alone against the long line of railroad ties. Nothing in the pictures suggested that within minutes, those images would become part of a murder investigation. At 2:13:51 p.m., Libby started recording video. Abby was near the far end of the bridge. Behind her, a man was walking in the same direction. He wore jeans and a dark jacket. His head appeared to be covered, although the distance and poor resolution would later make even that detail debatable. The girls noticed him. On the longer recording, they could be heard discussing the man behind them. Trial testimony indicated that one of them mentioned a gun. Then a male voice gave the command that would be replayed for years: "Guys, down the hill." The public would eventually hear only a few words and see a few seconds of movement. Libby and Abby heard the voice at close range, on a bridge where turning back meant moving toward the man who was approaching them. The recording stopped, but the phone continued collecting data. Its movement readings ended at about 2:32 p.m. The device never left the general area of the bridge, Deer Creek, and the place where the girls would later be found. That night, its battery died. Early the next morning, it briefly reconnected and received a cluster of delayed messages. By then, calls from the girls' families had been going unanswered for hours. When Abby and Libby failed to arrive at the pickup point, relatives began walking the trails. Police officers, firefighters, and volunteers joined the search. Darkness made the steep ground, creek banks, and old bridge dangerous. The organized effort was reduced overnight, although relatives and volunteers continued looking. At daylight on February 14, the official search expanded again. Around midday, searchers crossed to the north side of Deer Creek. In a wooded area on private property, less than a mile from where the girls had been dropped off, they found Abby and Libby. For years, authorities refused to publicly describe how the girls had died. That silence protected details investigators hoped only the killer would know, but it also created a vacuum that online speculation quickly filled. At Richard Allen's trial in 2024, the jury finally heard the medical evidence. Both girls had been killed by sharp force injuries to the neck. Their throats had been cut. The medical examiner testified that Libby had several overlapping incised wounds and that Abby had one major wound. Neither girl had been shot. Prosecutors argued that the gun mentioned on the recording had been used to frighten and control them, while a sharp weapon was used to kill them. The scene contained details that were difficult to place into a simple sequence. Libby was found without clothing. Abby was clothed, but she was wearing some of Libby's clothes. Other garments were recovered from Deer Creek. Tree limbs and sticks had been placed across or near their bodies. Libby's phone was underneath Abby. Near the girls, between their bodies and close to Libby's ankle, investigators found an unfired .40 caliber cartridge. It had not struck a target. It had never left the barrel of a gun. The prosecution's theory was that it had been loaded into a semi-automatic pistol and then ejected when the weapon was mechanically cycled. That action can leave marks from the gun's internal parts on the cartridge case. At the time, however, investigators did not have a gun to compare with it. The scene also failed to give police the kind of clean forensic identification many people expected. Testing produced no DNA profile linking Richard Allen to the girls or to the crime scene. No usable fingerprint placed him there. No victim DNA was found on the items seized from his home more than 5 years later. Sexual assault testing did not establish that a sexual assault had occurred. Police collected knives from Allen's house, but no knife was scientifically identified as the murder weapon. So investigators had something almost unheard of: a victim's recording of the man believed to have forced the girls away, and still lacked the evidence needed to put a name to his face. Within a day of finding Abby and Libby, police released still images taken from the video. The man in them soon became known as Bridge Guy. People enlarged the frames, sharpened the contrast, and argued over every blurred shape. Was that a cap, hair, a hood? Was something hidden beneath the jacket? Was his right hand in a pocket or holding an object? 9 days after the murders, authorities released the words "down the hill." In 2019, they released the word "guys" and a short moving clip. Officers warned that the man's walk might appear unusual because he was stepping across broken railroad ties. The warning did little to slow the comparisons. Viewers studied his gait as though it might reveal a name. The clip seemed to bring the public close to the crime. In reality, it kept the most important features just out of reach. A body could be seen. A voice could be heard. A face could not be recognized. That gap shaped the next 5 years. Relatives, neighbors, co-workers, and strangers were placed beside the image of Bridge Guy. Side-by-side photographs spread across social media. Some innocent men were accused publicly and repeatedly. Podcasts and online groups examined every rumor, every arrest, and every person who had ever been near the trails. The volume of attention helped keep Abby and Libby's names in public view, but it also buried verified information beneath thousands of confident theories. Even the official sketches created confusion. In July 2017, police released a composite showing an older-looking man. In April 2019, during a press conference announcing a new direction, investigators displayed a very different sketch of a younger face. The second sketch had actually been created earlier in the investigation. Authorities later said the two sketches represented different people. But for the public, the change raised an often obvious question. Had police spent 2 years looking in the wrong direction? Investigators received thousands of tips. They searched properties, examined phones and computers, reviewed alibis, tested evidence, and followed men whose names became permanently attached to the case, even though none was charged with murdering Abby and Libby. Ronald Logan drew immediate attention because the girls were found on his property. Investigators learned that he had asked someone to give a false account of his movements on February 13 and obtained a warrant to search his land and home. Logan had legal problems unrelated to the murders, and lying about his whereabouts gave police a clear reason to investigate him closely. But the search did not lead to a murder charge. Logan died in 2022. Then came the fake social media account known as Anthony Shots. Keegan Kline admitted using the account to contact underage girls and obtain sexual images. Investigators discovered that the account had communicated with Libby. Kline was questioned, and in 2022, police searched a section of the Wabash River near Peruru, Indiana. For a time, public attention shifted toward the possibility that the murders had begun with an online predator. Kline was later sentenced for child exploitation crimes. He was not charged with the Delphi murders, and no evidence presented at Richard Allen's trial established that Kline had participated in the killings. Each time a name surfaced, the same question returned. Was this the man in Libby's video? Each time the evidence stopped before it reached an answer. And throughout all of this, Richard Allen continued living and working in Delphi. In 2017, Allen was 44 years old. He worked at the local CVS, only a few blocks from the courthouse, where he would eventually stand trial. He had no significant history of violent crime. Customers saw him behind the pharmacy counter. What they did not know was that Allen had already placed himself on the trail during the critical period. A few days after the murders, police asked everyone who had been near the trails to come forward. Allen responded. A Department of Natural Resources officer met him in the parking lot of a grocery store. Allen said he had been on the trail that afternoon. He said he had walked onto the Monon High Bridge. He reported seeing a group of girls near the Freedom Bridge area. He gave the officer his address, phone number, and the identifying number for his mobile device. That information should have remained visible. Several juvenile witnesses had reported passing a man on the trail. Another woman said she saw a man standing on the high bridge shortly before Abby and Libby approached it. The time window was narrow. A lone adult man who admitted walking onto the bridge and seeing the same group of witnesses should at least have been compared carefully with the video, the route, and the timeline. Instead, the lead sheet was marked cleared and filed incorrectly. Records contained confusion over Allen's name and the place where he said he had parked. The interview never became part of the central picture. Investigators were building around Bridge Guy. Think about what that meant. While police asked the public to identify the man in the video, one man had already told an officer that he was there. While people across the country enlarged pixels and debated the shape of a hat, his own account sat inside the case under the wrong designation. Libby had captured the beginning of the crime. Witnesses had described a man moving along the same route. Allen had supplied his own name. The three pieces simply were not placed beside one another. In September 2022, Kathy Shank, a retired state employee volunteering to organize and review the enormous Delphi file, came across the old lead. Something about it did not look resolved. She recognized that the man described in the document was Richard Allen and brought the record to investigators. 5.5 years after Abby and Libby were killed, police returned to the man who had come forward in the first days of the case. During an interview in October 2022, Allen again said that he had gone to the trails that afternoon. He described walking to the first platform of the Monon High Bridge, looking down at the fish, and then leaving. He remembered passing 3 girls. He denied seeing Abby or Libby, and denied being the man in the video. After so many years, some details in his account were less certain. His recollection of his exact arrival time, vehicle, and clothing did not remain consistent in every telling. Investigators questioned him about blue jeans, dark jackets, a possible head covering, and the image of Bridge Guy. Allen said he feared that police were trying to make him a fall guy. Police obtained a search warrant for his house, car, and electronic devices. Inside the home, they found a blue Carhartt-style jacket, ammunition, multiple knives, and a Sig Sauer P226 pistol chambered in .40 caliber. Allen had owned the gun since 2001. For the first time, investigators had a firearm they could compare with the unfired cartridge found beside the girls. At trial, a state firearms examiner described the tiny scratches and impressions on the cartridge. She had test-fired Allen's Sig Sauer and cycled unfired rounds through its action, then compared those marks with the round recovered beside the girls. Her conclusion was that the crime scene cartridge had been cycled through Allen's pistol. That sentence carried enormous weight, but the object itself was easy to misunderstand. This was not a bullet fired into a body or wall. It was a live round that had moved through a gun and been ejected. The claimed match came from marks made by the pistol's internal parts, not from rifling inside the barrel. The prosecution gave jurors a direct sequence. Allen used the gun to control Abby and Libby. He worked the slide or cleared the chamber. The cartridge dropped near Libby's ankle and remained there until investigators found it. The defense slowed that sequence down. The cartridge carried no fingerprint or DNA identifying Allen. It could not show who handled it or when it reached the ground. The examiner's conclusion depended on a visual comparison that the defense called subjective and unable to exclude every other pistol of the same make and model. Allen said he had never been at the crime scene and could not explain how a cartridge associated with his gun was found there. So the round did not answer the case by itself. It did something more limited and still important. It connected a gun Allen had owned since 2001 to an object lying beside Abby and Libby. The jury had to decide whether that connection was reliable enough to carry weight. The witnesses created a similar problem. Several people had seen a man on or near the trail. Taken together, their accounts allowed prosecutors to describe a lone man arriving, waiting near the bridge, following the girls, and later walking back toward town muddy and bloodied. Taken separately, the descriptions did not fit perfectly. One witness remembered a younger-looking man with brown, curly, or poofy hair and a boyish face. Another initially described a muddy man in a tan coat, then testified years later that the man had been muddy and bloody and was wearing blue. Witnesses described different types of vehicles near the abandoned Child Protective Services building, where prosecutors believed Allen had parked. None of those witnesses pointed at Allen in court and said they personally recognized him as the man they had seen. The state did not ask the jury to rely on one face-to-face identification. It asked them to look at the overlap. Allen admitted he had been on the trail. He said he had seen the group of juvenile girls. Those girls said they had passed a man they later believed was Bridge Guy. Another witness saw a man standing on the bridge before Abby and Libby arrived. A security camera recorded a dark vehicle, similar to Allen's, traveling toward the area at 1:27 p.m. Allen owned clothing broadly consistent with the figure in the video. The cartridge near the girls, according to the state examiner, had passed through his pistol. Then the case moved from microscopic marks to Allen's own voice. At first, he denied the murders. He denied them during police interviews and continued denying them for months after he was taken into custody in October 2022. Allen was held in a maximum security state prison while awaiting trial. The state said he required extraordinary protection because of threats and the national attention surrounding the case. His attorneys described the arrangement as prolonged isolation imposed on a man who was still legally presumed innocent. Over time, his mental condition deteriorated. Records and testimony described severe depression, paranoia, disorganized speech, refusal of food, extreme weight loss, self-harm, and psychosis. At times, Allen appeared detached from reality. He made claims unrelated to Delphi and took responsibility for events his family said had never happened. After doctors found him gravely disabled, he was involuntarily medicated. During that same period, he repeatedly said that he had killed Abby and Libby. Jurors heard a recorded call in which Allen told his wife, "I did it. I killed Abby and Libby." She told him something was wrong and refused to accept what he was saying. Allen also made admissions to his mother prison employees, the warden, other inmates, and his treating psychologist. Prosecutors counted more than 60 confessional statements. The number was striking. The circumstances were just as important. Were these the words of a killer finally speaking plainly? Or were they the words of a gravely ill prisoner, repeating material he had read, heard, and absorbed until he could no longer separate the case from his own thoughts? His most detailed account came through prison psychologist Dr. Monica Walla. According to Walla's trial testimony, Alan said he followed Abby and Libby on the bridge and used a gun to force them down the hill. He said he intended to sexually assault them, but a van arriving nearby frightened him and interrupted the plan. He forced the girls across Deer Creek, cut their throats, placed branches over their bodies, and described a cartridge falling from or being ejected from the gun. For the first time in the trial, the scattered objects formed a possible sequence. The gun explained why two girls obeyed the command on the recording. The ejected cartridge explained the live round beside them. The creek crossing explained the wet clothing. The van supplied a reason for the interruption. The wounds and branches matched facts that investigators had kept from the public for years. The blurred figure on Libby's screen now had, in the prosecution's account, a gun, a route across the creek, and a sequence for the hidden minutes after down the hill. The defense attacked the source of that account. Before making his most detailed statements, Alan had received discovery materials describing the case. His lawyers argued that details presented as private knowledge could have come from those records, from conversations in prison, or from years of intense coverage. Walla acknowledged that she had followed the Delphi case and listened to podcasts about it. She placed a summary of Alan's statement in his medical record, but her original handwritten notes were not preserved. That left the defense room to challenge the accuracy of the summary and the boundaries between treatment, personal interest, and evidence collection. The admissions also came mixed with false claims, religious ideas, fears of global destruction, confusion about reality, and moments when Alan appeared unsure whether he had confessed at all. A defense psychologist diagnosed major depression with psychotic features and testified that Alan was not faking the breakdown. The state answered with Alan's clearer moments. Witnesses described times when he was coherent, oriented, and able to speak logically. Jurors heard calls in which his words sounded direct. Prosecutors argued that the detailed account matched too many concealed facts to be dismissed as random psychosis. Everyone agreed that Alan had confessed. The trial turned on whether the jury could trust the man speaking those words. The confessions could not be separated from the condition of the man making them, and neither side could ask the jury to hear only half of that reality. The trial began in October 2024 under unusual restrictions. Jurors were selected from Allen County, nearly 100 miles from Delphi, transported to Carroll County, and sequestered. Cameras were prohibited. Reporters waited for a limited number of courtroom seats and reconstructed each day from handwritten notes. For 7 years, the public had experienced this case through images, audio clips, sketches, press conferences, leaks, and social media arguments. When the evidence was finally tested in court, the public could not watch it happen. Prosecutors then walked the jurors through the case as one continuous chain. Libby's video placed a man behind the girls and captured the order to go down the hill. The mention of a gun helped explain how one adult controlled 2 teenagers. Alan placed himself on the trail and bridge. Witness described a similarly dressed man moving through the same corridor. A vehicle resembling his appeared on nearby surveillance. The cartridge tied his pistol to the ground beside the girls, according to the state examiner. His confession supplied a possible motive and sequence. The van became one of the most contested links. Brad Weber, who lived near the crime scene, testified that he drove home along a private lane that afternoon. Prosecutors argued that this was the van Alan had described, the arrival that frightened him, interrupted an intended sexual assault, and caused him to move the girls across the creek. The defense challenged Weber's timing with earlier statements and electronic information that it believed placed him home later. Allen's appellate lawyers now argue that the testimony changed in a way that strengthened the state's case. The state denies knowingly presenting anything false. Then the defense pulled the chain apart. No witness identified Allen's face. Descriptions of the man and vehicles varied. The bridge video was too blurred for a reliable facial comparison. The voice comparison was subjective. The cartridge analysis was contested. No blood, DNA, hair, or fingerprint tied Allen to the girls. Police found no victim evidence in his home, car, or clothing. The murder weapon was never identified. And the most detailed confessions followed months of isolation and a documented psychiatric collapse. Again and again, the arguments returned to the same objects: a phone, a cartridge, wet clothing, branches, and Allen's own words. Each moved the case forward. None carried the entire weight. Allen's lawyers also tried to place another explanation before the jury. They wanted to present a third-party theory involving men associated with Odinism, a modern form of Norse pagan belief that, in some settings, has overlapped with white nationalist groups. They argued that the branches resembled symbols and that investigators had once considered a ritualistic element. The jury never heard that theory. Judge Francis Gull ruled that the defense had not established an admissible connection between the proposed third parties and the killings. The ruling did not explain every branch, item of clothing, or body position. It meant the defense had not connected a specific outsider to the crime strongly enough to present that person as an alternate perpetrator. Outside court, a strange scene can support years of speculation. Inside court, the question was narrower. Where was the evidence tying another person to the act? Medical and blood pattern testimony offered part of a reconstruction, but not a complete one. Both girls died from cuts to the neck. Evidence suggested that Libby was wounded near a tree and later moved a short distance. Abby had little blood on her hands or arms, which led one investigator to believe she may have been restrained or incapacitated when she was killed. The reason Abby was wearing Libby's clothes was never fully explained. Neither was the placement of every branch. And then there was the phone. Libby's phone was found beneath Abby. Prosecutors argued that Abby's body had helped conceal the device. During closing arguments, they thanked Libby for recording the man and Abby for the phone remaining hidden beneath her. No one can prove that Abby deliberately protected it. What can be proved is that the phone stayed at the scene. The killer did not find it or destroy it. The recording survived. On November 7, 2024, the jurors began deliberating. They spent roughly 19 hours considering the evidence over several days. On November 11, they returned to the courtroom and found Richard Allen guilty on all 4 counts: 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of murder committed during or while attempting kidnapping. The verdict did not explain which piece of evidence mattered most. It did not tell the public whether jurors trusted every confession, every witness, or every part of the state's reconstruction. It meant that, after hearing the competing arguments, they believed the evidence proved Allen's responsibility beyond a reasonable doubt. On December 20, Judge Gull sentenced him to 2 consecutive 65-year terms, 1 for Abby and 1 for Libby, for a total of 130 years. 6 relatives delivered victim impact statements. Their words returned the case to what years of evidence arguments could sometimes obscure. 2 families had spent nearly 8 years living with the final afternoon of 2 children they loved. The judge told Allen, "These families will deal with your carnage forever." Allen did not confess in court and did not offer a public explanation. His attorneys said the fight would continue on appeal. It has. Allen's appellate lawyers argue that evidence seized from his house should have been excluded because investigators omitted or changed important facts in the search warrant application. They challenge the admission of statements made during his mental collapse. They also argue that the trial judge improperly restricted evidence supporting a third-party defense, and that the state relied on disputed testimony about the van. Indiana's Attorney General has answered that the warrant was valid, the confessions were voluntary and properly admitted, and the trial court acted within the law when it excluded evidence that did not meet the required standard. As of August 2026, Richard Allen's conviction remains in effect. Oral argument before the Indiana Court of Appeals is scheduled for September 21, 2026. The appellate judges will not simply decide whether they would have reached the same verdict. They will examine whether legal errors occurred during the investigation or trial, and whether any error was serious enough to require new proceedings. Whatever happens on appeal, one question will remain attached to the original investigation. How did a case with video, audio, witnesses, a narrow timeline, and a man who admitted being on the bridge remain unsolved for 5.5 years? Some of the answer lies in the limitations of the evidence. Libby's camera captured a body, but not a recognizable face. The voice recording lasted only seconds. Witnesses disagreed about age, hair, clothing, and vehicles. The crime scene yielded no decisive DNA profile. The sketches pulled the public in different directions. The cartridge could not be compared with Allen's pistol until investigators had reason to search his house. But the lost interview cannot be explained by blurry pixels or incomplete forensics. Allen's 2017 statement did not prove that he was Bridge Guy. It did not prove that he had met Abby and Libby. It did not justify an arrest. It did justify a closer look. Investigators could have compared his claimed time on the trail with the phone timeline. They could have placed his route beside the witness accounts. They could have asked more detailed questions about his clothing, his vehicle, and the gun he owned. They could have preserved the lead where future investigators would see it. None of that happened in 2017. Instead, the image of Bridge Guy became more famous than the name already buried inside the file. People around the world studied the few visible details on Libby's screen, while the most consequential interview sat under the wrong name, in the wrong place, marked as though it had been resolved. When Kathy Shank found that paper in 2022, she did not discover a new suspect from outside the case. She recovered a man the investigation had already encountered. The prosecution's case against Allen ultimately depended on convergence. His own account placed him on the trail and bridge. Witnesses described a man moving through the same corridor. Surveillance showed a similar vehicle. He owned clothing broadly consistent with Bridge Guy. A state examiner linked the cartridge to his pistol, and after his arrest he confessed repeatedly, sometimes with details that prosecutors said matched the hidden facts of the crime. The defense separated those pieces and challenged every connection. Presence was not murder. Similar clothing was not identification. A similar vehicle was not proof. Witness memories had changed. The cartridge method was disputed. The confessions came from a man in psychosis. The jury heard both versions and decided that the pieces considered together proved Richard Allen was responsible. The verdict supplied a legal answer, but it did not fill every blank. The exact sequence near Deer Creek remains uncertain. The reason for the clothing arrangement is still unknown. No murder weapon was conclusively identified. Prosecutors relied largely on Allen's confession to explain a sexual motive, but no completed sexual assault was proved. As the appeal proceeds, the reliability and admissibility of statements made during severe mental illness remain central questions, not loose ends that the verdict automatically erased. Richard Allen, nevertheless, stands convicted of murdering Abby Williams and Libby German. For years, the defining image of Delphi was the blurred man taking careful steps across the old railroad ties. It was replayed so often that Bridge Guy began to overshadow the two girls whose courage created the evidence in the first place. The more important image is the phone beneath Abby. Libby saw something was wrong and pressed record. She captured the approaching man before police knew there had been a crime, before her family knew she was missing, and before the name Bridge Guy existed. The video could not save Abby or Libby. It could not produce a clear face. It could not explain everything that happened after the command to go down the hill. But it fixed the beginning of the crime to a precise moment, on a specific bridge, with a body and a voice that could not later be denied. The phone gave investigators the route. It gave prosecutors the anchor of their case. It gave the jury the last known moments before the girls were forced away. And 5.5 years later, a volunteer opened an overlooked record and connected that man on the bridge to a name police had possessed almost from the beginning.